Hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife,
Janet Needham.
Awesome. And our producer, Lindsay. We are streaming live today in Moses Lake at Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy in our studio. So thank you for listening in and watching. We really appreciate it. Today, we'll be talking about the importance of sleep and recovery, rest and recovery. So follow along. What's really important today is we know that people like free stuff. So we are giving away 2 free things today on our podcast, and you have to call in live to receive them. So our phone number is 509-537-0411. We will call it out in 2 different segments in the show. So it will be a Fitbit heart rate sleep monitor and also a diurnal cortisol test. We'll talk a little bit more about cortisol a little bit later when it comes to our topic of sleep. So, but you have to call in live when that happens. So tune in, keep tuning in. So the importance of rest, and I put that as recovery because that is how we get stronger, is when we recover. We do not get stronger when we work out. We do not get stronger when we eat. We do not get bigger when we eat. I mean, not right then and there. We are anabolic when we rest. That's when we get stronger. That's when we repair, all that. So it's very, very important. So what is the definition of sleep? So I wrote down a fancy, I copied this out of a dictionary. Copy a condition of body and mind, such as that which typically recurs for several hours every night. Okay, that's a very important point. In which the nervous system is relatively inactive, the eyes closed, the posture muscles relaxed, and consciousness practically suspended. That's the formal definition of sleep. How important is sleep? Did you know that we will die without sleep before we'll die without food? So am I going to say that sleep is more important than food? Yeah, I'm going to. I think that's a very important point to make. You know, obviously nutrition is very important also, and exercise is very important also. But we've talked about on this show, there's 3 basic things that we can do to keep our bodies healthy, in general, physically healthy. And there's a lot of details involved, but really it's exercise, sleep, and nutrition. Those are the 3 things we can do to keep our bodies healthy. So if I already said that sleep is the most important because we'll die without sleep before we'll die without food, and food is not the most important, then exercise is the least important. Am I saying that we shouldn't exercise? Absolutely not. We have stressed on this show how important exercise is, not just for our physical body, but for our mental body. Exercise is very, very, very important, especially for long-term health. Exercise is important. And it doesn't have to be vigorous. And we've talked about that in a podcast before. I'm not sure what the number of podcasts was, but we talked about exercise specifically. And, exercise is different for everybody, just like sleep will be different for everybody. So just some interesting note, the average person can live for 3 weeks without food. And I know that sounds like a lot, and it wouldn't be very much fun. Although after fasting for about 48 hours, our body stops being hungry mostly, and we're not as hungry. So, now this doesn't mean water. We can only live about 3 days without water. So I guess sleep is as important as water is when it comes to our body. So, but we can only live 3 days without sleep. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, and they've done some studies. But if you Google, a video of people being deprived of sleep because they've done studies of it, I mean, you should see how their cognitive function and physical function goes downhill after about 2 or 3 days. It's amazing. So another point to make is that people that brag about not needing a lot of sleep, go ahead and brag all you want, but you are taking years off your life. Or people that brag about, oh, well, you got all the time to sleep when you're dead. Here's the reality. People that are productive people that are more productive actually rest and recover better. That is very, very important, whether it be a high caliber business person, whether it be a professional athlete. Recovery is so important.
Well, if you think about just what happens to your brain physically and mentally, whether you're an adult or a child, deprivation usually means that we don't perform at the level that we should. Healthcare workers are notorious for that, especially when they're working in the hospital setting, when they're working hours that are not healthy for our bodies. We have plant workers that work shift hours, and we have truck drivers that work, so there's many jobs out there where the performance can go up and down depending on the level of sleep. And we know that children are better at their performance when they have sleep with their education and just their overall quality of life. So sleep is a quality issue, I believe. Quantity, we always think about how important that is, but I think quality of life is where sleep sits in my brain.
Absolutely. And we'll get into some specific details that Janet can share with you, how working shift work and not getting great sleep can really, really make a difference in your life negatively. So notice in the definition of sleep, I stressed how mostly at night. Again, we are supposed to sleep at night. We're not supposed to sleep during the day. And, hands goes off to people working shift work, whether it be swing shift or whether it be night shift. Hands off to you guys. But I will tell you this. Our bodies are made to work during the day and sleep at night. We are diurnal creatures. We are not nocturnal. So anytime somebody comes to me and they're having like hormone related issues and they're a night worker, they're not sleeping. I mean, honestly, the first thing I would recommend, and I know this is a hard one to do, but the first thing I would recommend is you've got to change jobs. You've got to change your shift. And some people like those shifts. I get that for multiple reasons, but it is hard on your body. So, at Health Solutions, we are all about solutions. We're not about just treating symptoms. We want to fix the problem. So rather than just adding some kind of drug to somebody's regimen to help them sleep, we want to fix the issue. We want to fix the problem. And if their problem is that they're working nights, they need to fix that problem if they can. So during sleep, our body does physical repair between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Psychic repair 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. So the psychic repair 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., that's when we're usually dreaming. Under ideal circumstances, you should be in bed by 10 p.m. I know to some people that sounds crazy, but in bed by 10 p.m., up by 6 p.m., and keep that on a regular schedule. That is very, very important. And you shouldn't vary that very often.
You mean up by 6 a.m.?
I'm sorry, up by 6 a.m. Thank you, Janet, for correcting me. Janet, do you have any comments on sleep patterns here?
I do, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they're not consistent about those patterns. And I know from just having children in my home that if you start a pattern in their life early, that significantly makes a big difference for them. And of course, you have to adjust along the way. As our children get older, of course, as an infant, they might need up to 16 hours as they're growing. And of course, by the time they're 6 or 12, they might need only 12 or 9 hours. So it changes as we age. But certainly, I think the takeaway is that a pattern of regiment is important. And I know some people will say, well, this is just how I am. And that's fine. I understand that some people are more tendent to stay up later at night and get up later. But our bodies were meant to get up when the sun rises and to go to sleep when we have less sunlight. So, it's a personal choice, but again, it's called quality, not quantity in my mind.
That's right. And I talked about diurnal versus nocturnal. Nocturnal means we're active at night, so, owls and bats are nocturnal, right? Diurnal means we're active during the day, diurnal. Sunlight, just like Janet was talking about, affects our mood and activity. There's no surprise that we start waking up, when we sleep at night, we start waking up when it starts getting light out. So I know for those of us that live in northern latitudes, like we do up here in Washington, sometimes it starts getting light out at 4:30 in the morning. And so we'll talk about some tricks to help that. So we're not getting up at 4:30 in the morning. And we talked about night shift workers already. And one of the things that happens is that our body follows a diurnal variation. So it produces hormones in a different variation during the day than it does at night for obvious reasons. We produce hormones during the day that are that are more to help us get going. Cortisol being one of those. So cortisol is produced highest in the morning, or should be produced highest in the morning, and then slowly go down throughout the day until it's lowest at like 2 o'clock in the morning, when we should be deep in sleep and dreaming. If your cortisol pattern is not following that, that's a big problem. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. So Janet talked about consistency of sleep, and we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of sleep, which she didn't call it she called it consistency. We're just going to name it regularity in this podcast, and we're going to use the terms from Matthew Walker. Matthew Walker has his PhD in neuroscience. He's a professor at UC Berkeley, and he has a wonderful podcast. I recommend it really, really heavily. Rhonda Patrick podcast had Matthew Walker on, and it's a great podcast. I learned a lot about sleep and just how important it is. So we're going to go into 4 different things with sleep. There's depth, duration, continuity, and regularity. We'll go into some of the things to help those, and we'll go into some of the definitions. There's a lot of overlap when it comes to things that you can do to help those. So depth of sleep. So it's reflected in the electrical quality of the sleep waves. So how deep are we sleeping? So here's some tips. Stop looking at screens at least 1 hour before bedtime. And I know that sounds hard, and believe me, I am guilty of this one. I'm really, really guilty of this one, and I need to try to be better. But any kind of artificial, I wouldn't say most kind of artificial light puts out blue light, especially our phones. Now, they do have that night mode now. Most of the phones do, because they realize that blue light was what was trying to, what keeps stimulating us to not want to sleep. So the blue light goes away. But I think that's just kind of a Band-Aid to a bigger problem. I think really you just need to get away from the electronics, and you'd be a lot better off. So stick to your bedtime even on weekends. Janet, do you want to discuss that a little bit?
Yeah. So I would say that, from a parent, the easiest thing to do is have a regular time that you put your children down, so they get into a pattern throughout their whole entire life. It sets up them for success. And I understand that there's going to be alterations throughout our life as far as changing, whether you're in school or, traveling or work or whatever, but have a good pattern. So find that time and try to stick to it. So, you, like Shawn said, you can start stepping away from your screen time, whether it's TV, computers, and phones, about a half an hour prior to going to bed, and you have that bedtime in mind. And then keep in mind, when you choose that, it takes a few weeks before that becomes a pattern in your life, but stick to it. Choose that time and then stick to it. And before you know it, that's going to be closer to a healthy routine. So, choose the time. And it's interesting how even, in our house, we have a couple pets, and it's funny. They tell us it's bedtime. It's time. I want to go to bed. And, they have their little routine. So set up that routine for yourself.
Well, and speaking of that with pets, I mean, pets are no different than children. I mean, they are, but sometimes when you schedule them, they're not. And kids and all humans, for that matter, want to be on a schedule. We're meant to be on a schedule. There's no doubt about it. That's why we're diurnal. But sometimes if people don't follow that schedule, then it puts the whole household in a bad schedule. So be good role models for your family, and you start being the role model for when to go to bed and when to get up, and they will follow for sure. It's no different than, don't expect your kids to exercise or eat well if you don't. Same thing with sleep. If you don't sleep well and you're up at 2 o'clock in the morning playing video games, you think your kids are really gonna be going to bed at 10 o'clock like you told them to? No, probably not. So stick to your bedtime even on weekends, and you can vary that by an hour or so. And believe me, don't This is not 100%. These are just things, the recommendations. It's not that, anybody can follow this all the time. Although I will say this, when you're in a really, really stressful time, the better you can stick to this plan, the better off you'll do, because the better you'll recover. So like if you're training really hard for an event, or you just got a lot of stress going on at work, the more you can make yourself go to bed earlier at a set time and get up at a set time, the better you'll be off, because the better you'll recover.
I truly believe that, because I found in college that that was the case too for even studying. So college students, don't try to do that all night jam, because that's when your brain starts forgetting, and your short-term memory is the only thing you have left. So don't do that. Just get your rest.
That's right. And it's important your brain gets rest too, not just your physical body.
Right.
So find your ideal temperature. This is different for everybody, but in general, your body wants to cool off a little bit to sleep better. So I've heard reports 65 to 66 degrees. That's too cold for some, but remember, we sleep under covers, so it doesn't really, you'll still stay warm underneath the covers. But it is, I do know this, I can't sleep if it's over 73 degrees. I just can't very well. So it's important that I usually turn our HVAC down to 65 at night, 65 to 66. So avoid exercising too late at night. That might seem obvious, but I know I've been guilty of that. And I think as I've gotten a little bit older, it's been harder for me to exercise very late. So I try to make a hard, fast rule that I am done exercising, done with my workout by 7 o'clock, depending on how intense and how long it is. But by 7 o'clock at night, I want to be done with my workout. Because what does exercise do? Exercise stimulates a lot of neurotransmitters to keep you going, right? So it's hard to it's hard to kind of relax when those neurotransmitters are still firing a lot. So avoid large meals before bedtime. There's multiple reasons for that. Your body spends time trying to digest them. Sometimes you can get reflux. Reflux is when the food starts coming back up because you lay back down and gravity is working just like it should. So avoid large meals at bedtime. Depth continued. Take time to unwind. There's a lot of ways to do this. Some people will say, and this goes back to cooling off, some people say take a cool bath. I don't know of anybody that enjoys a cool bath, really. Well, no, I don't know anybody, but I wouldn't enjoy a cool bath. But if you do want to cool your body temperature, a warm bath will cool your body temperature, because after you get out of the bath, through evaporation, you will definitely start cooling off. So a bath before bedtime is definitely a way to unwind. Alcohol, Janet, you want to talk a little bit about alcohol? We're going to get more into that also later.
Yeah, so some people get in the habit of having alcohol right before going to bed because they think they sleep better, but that might initially help you fall to sleep, but your sleep is not very deep. So you're not going to get into the REM sleep, and it's usually broken up. So especially right before going to bed on a regular basis, I don't recommend that. Now, I'm not saying that, we can't have a time frame where that happens occasionally, but if you're doing it every day and it's a habit, it's something you probably want to break, because you're not getting the repair you need to, and that would be both physically and mentally.
Yeah, that's true. And we're going to get more into that a little bit later in the discussion when we start talking about drugs, because alcohol is a drug. Same with caffeine. Caffeine's a drug. We're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but limit that after 2 p.m. Everybody's different there. Exercise regularly. So I just am I talking out of both sides of my mouth by saying don't exercise too late and exercise regularly? No, not at all. Exercise is very important to help us sleep well. And I think one of the things that has happened in our lifestyles, as humans over the last, especially as Americans for sure, over the last 30 to 40 years, is we don't have as much physical labor. So, then that physical labor makes us tired, right? We've got all these neurotransmitters going off in our bodies trying to get us through the day of heavy lifting or, heavy endurance, whatever that is. And so when we get home, what's the first thing we want to do? We want to eat and we want to go to bed. And that was pretty common, especially, back in the agrarian society, especially when the sun up, sun down thing, because the sun was down anyway, you couldn't work without sunlight, and so you would come home, you would eat, and you would fall asleep physically just because you're so tired. I will say I've had that personal experience many different times when I've had a hard workout, a hard bike ride. It makes me, as long as it's not too late that I finish, it makes me sleep a lot better that night. Janet, do you have any comments on that?
I do. I think that one of the things that we don't have on the list, but this would go in with exercise, and to any parent out there, if you have taken your child out during the day, they sleep better. So that's the same thing for adults. I think as we have more indoor working office jobs, we aren't out in the outdoors. And there's just something that I believe occurs to us as organisms, just as humans, that when we get that exposure to the outdoor elements, that we just sleep better. And if you can incorporate that in with your exercise pattern, I think that's a very healthy thing, because more things happen, I think, out in that sunlight than we give credit to nature on that one. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this too, but limit the bedroom for two things: sleep and romance. That's it. Time your naps appropriately. I think naps are important. I try to take a nap every day. Don't get to every day, but I try to take one every day. Naps are recovery for sure.
that's true. But let's keep in mind too, with our elderly patients, that maybe not having naps too close to bedtime, sometimes that kind of interrupts. So kind of keep those things in mind too when it's appropriate, because I know personally that if I've been really exhausted and it's later in the evening and I feel like sleeping, is like, I'm not going to get to bed if I lay down and take too long of a nap, or if I lay down, I might be better off just waiting for bedtime.
Yes, they have to be timed appropriately. That's for sure. So duration, we talked about depth. Now duration. Duration should be 7 to 9 hours. Janet, you want to discuss some times,
Yeah.
hour-wise, duration-wise, for different ages of us?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that infants, of course, need more sleep, and from newborn to their first year, they sleep constantly, and they need to sleep more as they are growing. But then, it changes as we get into toddler years. They need a little bit less. But when we start out, we can sleep up to 16 hours. By the time we're 5 years old, it might be 10 or 13. By the time we're 6 and 12, it could be 9 and 12. And again, that's going to vary between each child. Teenagers, they kind of turn into a little bit different requirements. And I think that really is going to depend on each individual, from 8 to 10 hours. But, I know with my boys that there were times where they were growing and they just couldn't get enough sleep. So keep in mind that, the growth pattern is going to determine how much need that they have. And then again, when they sleep is going to change too. My kids, when they were infants, were, okay, you can't get up past this time. You had to learn, 4 o'clock doesn't work for mom. So, we're going to keep that closer to 6. And then as we become adults, we still need about 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And I know there's people out there that say, I only need 5. Well, that might be your opinion, but I think the statistics of our health in the United States would state otherwise. Lack of sleep still is a contributor to heart disease and diabetes and many other things. So I think I would recheck that and think about that. And we can give you some points as we go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not a badge of honor to brag about how little sleep you get regularly. That's for sure. Now, notice how when Janet said, when teenagers are growing, they need more sleep. Now, not as much sleep as newborns, but why does our sleep vary? Why do we have need less sleep as we age? Well, if you think about it, growing. So think when you are in a big growth stage, you need more sleep. Remember, that's because that's when the body recovers, and that's when you get stronger, literally. So athletes, take heed. You do not get stronger by exercising. You get stronger when you rest and recover. So recovery is just as important as the exercise, and maybe more important. You have to listen to your body, that's for sure. So duration for an adult, 7 to 9 hours. White noise, what is white noise? There's phone apps out there that have white noise. It's just a noise, a background noise. You can use a fan too. It's not official white noise, but any kind of noise, just constant noise, can help with sleep. Dark room, remember, sunlight affects how we sleep. So up in northern latitudes, have a dark room. Shades, So you have dark shades, artificial light in the room. Don't forget about that. So for one thing, turn your phones upside down. So if they do go off, and they should be in airplane mode or some mode where you're not listening to them all night long, make sure they're not lighting up over anything. So, or a clock, if you're using an old time clock, some of those clocks are bright. Anything in the room, a security system, the screen in the security system that lights up, those can be artificial lights. So think about all the artificial lights that in your bedroom, and try to cover them up. It does make a difference. They do have, on Amazon, for like $9, you can buy those eye masks. They are very, very helpful, as long as you're not claustrophobic or kind of freak out a little bit when you go to sleep and when your eyes are covered up, because when you wake up, it's still dark. So temperature, we talked about. Phone, turn them off. Do a setting on your phone where only the most important people can get a hold of you, and maybe not even via text, maybe only if they call you, and they call you 2 times. That's the only way your phone will vibrate or go off. So pets in the room, this is very common. A lot of people don't realize it, but pets really do disturb your sleep. They're up and down a lot. So think about that. Drinking too late at night. Janet talked about alcohol, but this goes with all fluids. Because if you drink too late at night, you are going to possibly have to get up in the middle of the night or earlier than you needed to normally, and have to go to the bathroom. So, and that definitely interrupts the duration of your sleep. Continuity. So it's not just about depth and duration, but continuity. For how long did you sleep without waking up? So was there any kind of moment that woke you up during the night? Janet, you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So there are things that we have already discussed about keeping maybe a white noise so it's consistent, keeping your room dark, the temperature, your phone off, the pet's not in the room, not drinking too late at night. And that's water and then alcohol. But I think sometimes life happens. And so if you're a parent and you have a young child, you're waking up quite a bit. But as much as you can control, and just realize that, that time is short-lived, you'll get past it. And that's true even as a caregiver for somebody, sometimes those things wake us up. But if we are just making a purposeful point to control the things that we are able to, that makes it much better for ourselves, I think.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for that. Regularity. This one's very important. So it's not just what you do in one night. And if you follow the depth, duration, and continuity, for one night, you're not okay. Okay. How many times a week do you do that? How many times a month do you do that? So it's regularity. So again, like Janet said, stick to a schedule. Go to bed by 10, get up by 6. That can vary by like an hour on weekends, but try not to vary it too much, or it'll throw your schedule off. So fortunately, with modern day technology, we have many different ways to monitor our sleep. Most of the sleep monitors now are external devices you wear, and they have what's called an accelerometer. So they have an accelerometer built into them, so it tracks movement. Okay. So one of those is Fitbit Inspire with heart rate monitor, and the Oura Ring. We've actually talked about that one on our show before when my brother was on the podcast. And then there's phone apps. Sleepbot is one of them. There might be a newer app. Sleepbot it's no longer supported as an app because obviously it probably didn't work very well. And it was not monitoring. It didn't have an accelerometer in it. It was monitoring sound. So you had to have your cell phone on, and it would monitor sound from your room. And then, so there's obviously a lot of false positives, false negatives in there. So, maybe if you're in a deep snore, it would say that, you didn't get a very restful night just because it was loud. Well, some people can actually snore and sleep very deeply. So, if you are using a phone app and they do have an accelerometer, then you have to sleep with your phone. And I don't know how convenient that would be. I already think they're very distracting anyway when it comes to interrupting our sleep. So I don't think they're a good tool. So Fitbit Inspire with heart rate monitor. If you'd like to call in and get a free Fitbit right now, we would love for you to do that. 509-537-0411 to receive your free Fitbit. We'd love to hear from you. But Fitbit Inspire with heart rate, it tracks your activity, but it tracks your sleep too. So it has an app that you can download to track all that. But it tracks your sleep pattern. You get more insight into your light, deep, and REM sleep stages. It's not as specific as the Aura. So the Aura has all these fancy things: sleep score, sleep stages, time in bed, sleep efficiency, all this. Some of the stuff they kind of made up themselves so they could have a metric, which is fine. They kind of specialize in sleep, and that's kind of what they specialize in. But to compete with the rest of the market, they went ahead and added an activity monitor later on. So you can, when you wear it, it's just a little ring, and when you wear it, it monitors your activity, so your heart rate during the day. Also, it's quite a bit higher price than the other alternatives. So my go-to would be the Fitbit. I think it's probably the you get the most value from the Fitbit.
And of course,
Go ahead.
I think a piece of paper and just a notebook for a diary if you are not a tech app person. So if you are, let's say for my mom, she's in her mid 80s and she's not somebody that wants to pick up another piece of technology, make a diary.
Yeah, definitely a sleep diary.
Yeah.
Now, and I will tell you, speaking of these devices, don't let the device control you. It can be stressful enough. Our lives, how many things do we have to connect to every day? And sometimes connecting to another electronic device can be stressful itself. What happens when we get stressed? It increases our cortisol, and that can make it harder to sleep. So, because invariably what happens sometimes is you're trying to go to sleep, and this device doesn't connect, and then you get stressed out about it, and it's hard to sleep. So don't let the device control you, and don't let the data control you. The data is a tool to help guide you. You need to listen to your own body. Don't get stressed out by the data. Again, it's just a tool to help guide you. So let's talk a little bit about cortisol. We talked a little bit about it to start with. Janet, why don't you go ahead and discuss cortisol?
Well, so we already talked about sunlight, and one of the things that sunlight does for our body is it stimulates our body to release the hormone cortisol. And cortisol is important to give us the energy that we need to start our day. So usually we see that our highest levels are about 8 o'clock in the morning, but it depends on the person. But that's important to know because that's when you're ready for the day. We also think of it as the flight hormone. So if we need to respond to something in a quick manner, flight, that gives us the energy to do that. But it should decline throughout the day, and it should be at our lowest about 2 a.m. And if it's not, our diurnal fashion of our sleep and our activity goes away. We don't get into that deep sleep. We don't have REM sleep. So we have people that are waking up during the night, or they're feeling exhausted halfway through the day. They might get a second wind. You'll hear people say, I just got my second wind. Well, probably what happened is that their cortisol is shooting up at a time that's not very effective. Night shift workers are notorious for this happening to them. Shift workers that go from working a day shift to a night shift have problems with their patterns. And it even starts happening a little bit with teenagers, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But part of it is just a lifestyle for some of us. So there's ways of handling this. We can look at cortisol levels throughout the day. I recommend saliva testing for that because it's most convenient, because if you did it in your doctor's office, you'd have to be coming in and out many times throughout the day. It's less expensive. So is there anything I didn't cover on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, cortisol is produced in our adrenal glands. Our adrenal glands are right above our kidneys, renal and adrenal above. So they're little pea-sized glands, and like Janet says, they produce cortisol in a diurnal fashion. And if your cortisol, there's two things that can really go wrong with your cortisol. So if it's not following that curve, highest in the morning, going down, being lowest at 2 o'clock in the morning, then there's an issue. What we see a lot of times is we'll see it follows that diurnal pattern, but then come the evening, the cortisol spikes. And the cortisol spikes for multiple reasons. So let's say a mother comes home, she works all day, and she comes home and she's got the stress of taking care of her kids and taking care of the house. Then all of a sudden her cortisol peaks at night also. Well, that obviously is not conducive to good sleep. So that's a problem. That's a problem. So there's a lot of different ways that you can remedy that. Some lifestyle modifications for sure. And also there's some supplements you can take for that higher cortisol at night. But what happens is like if your cortisol is high all the time, especially at night, and your body's not getting that rest, then eventually your body says, wait a minute, I can't keep being on this fight or flight all the time.
Right.
And then your body will say,
Right.
I can't produce any more cortisol. And then you're kind of like flatlined. And we see patients like this all the time. And what you have to do is you have to get them sleeping again. You have to get them sleeping again. You have to get their cortisol up. There's supplements to help that also. And it's also some lifestyle changes also probably. So realize it's not, your body responds temporarily in a good way to have the higher cortisol, but long term, it's not good. We also see this in people that have had some kind of stress or trauma, like a big trauma in their life, like a spouse died, or like there's a big car wreck, or something like that where there's a trauma. Their cortisol is elevated quite often, and then all of a sudden 6-12 months later they're exhausted. Well, you check their cortisol levels are low, and basically what happens is their body just says, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
You have any comments on that, Janet?
I do, because if you don't have a proper level throughout your daily and for a long term, if it turns into a bad cycle or pattern, you're not repairing when you sleep. So you're setting yourself up for a chronic disease state. And we do know that a lot of Americans suffer from being deprived of sleep. So I believe there is a correlation between not repairing at night and our bodies becoming inflamed. And then we have the repair not happening while we're sleeping to our physical part of our body and our mental part of our body. So our organism is not repairing the way it has been designed to do that. So that's when I think part of the chronic diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all those things are a challenge for our system to repair for. So, rheumatoid arthritis, thyroid, I mean, there's all kinds of things that could set in for not just having a proper sleep.
Well, and I will tell you, when just talking to patients that have had some kind of cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, whatever, there was a lot of times there was something that precipitated that event. You ask them, it's like, okay, you just got diagnosed with breast cancer. What happened a year ago? Well, my dad passed away, and it was very stressful, and I was a caretaker for him, and next thing they have breast cancer. Now, association does not always prove causation, but Janet is correct. Our immune system stays healthy when we recover and sleep. That's how it gets healthier and gets stronger, just like our physical body too. So that's why recovery is so important. And that being said, so this is time where you can get a free cortisol test. It's $140 value. Call in now, 509-537-0411, and you can receive a free cortisol test. Progesterone and sleep. Janet's a progesterone expert. I will let her discuss this one.
So before we start with progesterone, this is important to both male and female, because a lot of times we break hormones down into this. It's going to be important for a lady and menopause and becoming pregnant. But progesterone actually is a hormone that gives our brain.
Hello, we have a caller on the line.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, hold on. Let me get you connected. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a caller on the line. Thank you. You're a caller. You are calling in about the diurnal cortisol test. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And what is your name?
Jareen.
Jareen. All right. Well, thank you for calling, Jareen. Where are you calling from?
George.
George Washington. Love it. So do you have any questions while we have you on the line?
No, I'm pretty sure my cortisol is way out of whack, and I just need to get a handle on it.
Okay, so tell us why. Are you having a problem sleeping?
No, it's my shape.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That can definitely be. So
I sleep
go ahead.
fine as far as I think I sleep fine.
Okay.
I wake up fine in the morning, refreshed and all.
So when you said your shape, correct? That's why you think your cortisol's out of whack?
My shape, yeah. I have a large gut.
Mm-hmm. And cortisol, so basically
I'm overweight.
Yeah, so what cortisol does is it prepares us for stress, whether it be mental stress or physical stress. And so it wants us to hang on to everything, including our fat, including any extra we have, because it's thinking we need to respond to some kind of event. And that's why it makes us hold on to that extra fat. So cortisol can definitely affect that, as well as your other hormones can. So Janine, it's Janine, correct? Jareen. Okay. Well, I am going to send your information, your phone number that you called in on, to my producer, and we will get you set up on and send you a free diurnal cortisol test. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Courtesy of Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy. Thank you for calling, Jareen.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
So getting back to progesterone and sleep, I believe that this is important for both male and female. I mean, we said sleep issues in women, but I think it's all of the above. And I prefer to use the hormone in an oral capsule and sustained release. And the reason I do is because as we break this down and metabolize the progesterone, it metabolizes into another hormone that helps us to modulate GABA, and that meaning we can sleep better as we are in our sleep pattern at night. And that's the truth for both men and women. But to talk about hormones, we get caught up in thinking they're just sex hormones, but hormones are actually messengers in our body. And so this metabolite is messaging your brain to sleep and to stay into a better sleep. So that's very important. And as we age, we become more depleted because obviously we're going through different changes in our life. So in this instance, we usually recommend that people supplement if they are low on progesterone with the hormone progesterone in an oral capsule. There's other medications that work at our GABA receptor site, but this is a normal or a natural approach. I will tell you, for all the years that we have helped women through menopause, peri, pre, and menopause, that if we can get that lady sleeping, then her body repairs and she feels better, of course, mentally and physically. So any comments with that?
No, you did a good job. Thank you so much, Janet. You're definitely an expert on that subject. So, like Janet said about progesterone, it's not just for women. Men can need it too to help sleep. It is metabolized into allopregnanolone, which modulates the GABA receptor. I know there's some fancy pharmacological terms there, but the reason I talk about it because prescription medications do the same thing. And remember, this is Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. We don't treat symptoms, we find solutions. We treat the problem. And if the problem is low progesterone, and you're having a lack of sleep because of low progesterone, a prescription medication is just putting a Band-Aid on it. It's not fixing the issue. So progesterone is very, very important. Another thing about progesterone, I think it's important to have a sustained release capsule. At Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy, we compound a sustained release for capsules. Sustained release means slow release. It releases progesterone throughout the entire night instead of immediately, like some of the commercially available products do. And we have talked to patients who use a commercially available product, and a lot of times they will wake up at like 2 o'clock in the morning after it wears off. Whereas that doesn't happen with our sustained release capsule too. So, and being a compounding pharmacy, we can make it in any dose. We don't just make 100 milligram and 200 milligram. We can make anything. Our most common is probably 50 to 200 milligram. There are patients that need quite a bit more, though. So here's some medications for sleep. I even included an OTC one in there. Janet, you want to talk about diphenhydramine?
Yeah, so most people know diphenhydramine is Benadryl, and it is in a lot of products that have the little PM after it. The downside of Benadryl is that it can make people almost feel drunk. And so it's not my go-to a lot of times, especially for elderly, because I don't want them to get up during the night and fall and break something, because they may have to get up to go to the restroom or things like that. Short term, I think it's fine for adults, but then again, there is the effect. I guess we term it in our pharmacy is kind of a dirty drug, meaning that it has a lot of side effects. So you could feel dry, tired, almost like you had a hangover from it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a dirty drug. I mean, diphenhydramine is an antihistamine to block histamine that produces allergies. But it's such a dirty drug. It has lots of other side effects, including anticholinergic side effects, which causes dry mouth, and that can also cause some CNS depression through the central system. So short term, and I don't know, what do you think, Janet? When you define short term, what do you mean? You mean, every night for a week or
no,
what?
I personally don't like people using any kind of drug longer than 2 weeks, but in this case, I would say maybe a night or two at the most. I obviously we're going to get it when we're taking it for the relief of cold symptoms and things like that, but I don't think more than a couple nights is really beneficial on that one.
Well, so Zolpidem, also known as Ambien. I love drug companies' names. You guys don't realize that. AM meaning morning, BN meaning good in French, so good morning. So Ambien was touted as, I love this. You got to love what drug companies do. So when Ambien first came out, they were just trying to sell it to all the pharmacists and all the doctors how it was better than the longer acting benzodiazepines. So you're going to wake up in the morning without a hangover effect, right? Good morning, right? And then, the drug companies are so smart and they are so innovative. What did they come up with like 10 years later after Ambien goes off patent? They come out with Ambien CR, controlled release. It releases slowly throughout the night. Well, wait a minute, I don't get it. You said Ambien was supposed to wake you up. It wasn't supposed to last all night, but now the CR formulation is even better. That's interesting. I always find that interesting with drug companies. They don't do a lot of innovation anymore. It's just kind of patent extension. So that's a whole other subject.
Well, the problem with Ambien in my mind is that, again, there is side effects. And one of the problems is that some people actually have some amnesia. They'll get up and go shopping, or get up and go down the stairs, or go do something, and they don't remember doing it. And so obviously that can set people up for some problems. So again, Ambien should be, I think, short term. It should be also careful, because if you do absolutely need to have some sleep relief, I don't feel like it should be one of those drugs that's every single night in a row.
Absolutely. It does work on the GABA receptor. Most of these drugs do, besides Belsomra. They work on the GABA receptor. So it works in the same principle as progesterone, but progesterone doesn't have the side effects like they do. Progesterone is not habit forming like all these. So there's no warning on progesterone to be habit forming.
No, and you don't have people that get up in the middle of the night and go somewhere either.
Yeah,
in their car, right?
Right. Progesterone doesn't cause retrograde amnesia either.
Or shopping on Amazon. I've heard of that.
About it, yeah. So benzodiazepines, they're old ones. Do you want to talk about the benzos, Janet?
Yeah, they've been around for a long, long time. My feeling about alprazolam, lorazepam, and the other is just that they are habit forming. We use it short term. I have no issue with that. I feel like there's appropriate times for them, but then again, it is a controlled substance, and so there is a downside to that. So, if I had a client that absolutely needed it, it's not that I'd say no. I just think that we need to be cautioned in our prescribing habits with it, and again, no longer than 2 weeks. And if it's a traumatic event or a trauma and somebody needs something short term, that's fine. But I think for everyday sleep, I'm not a fan of using these drugs for
Absolutely. So we won't go into, we'll just list them there, but there's not, the important thing is that short-term use and they are habit forming. So, take that into consideration. Now, diphenhydramine is over the counter and it is not habit forming. Alcohol. Alcohol is by far and away the most common medication used to treat insomnia. Actually, it's probably the most common medication where people use to medicate many different diseases. A lot of times, people that are alcoholics, they have other underlying diseases, whether it be depression, whether it be insomnia, many other issues going on, and they're using alcohol to self-medicate. So alcohol is a CNS depressant. There is no doubt about it. I mean, if you get too much alcohol, if you drink too much alcohol and you can keep it down without vomiting, then you will die. It will stop you from breathing, period. So it is a CNS depressant. And that's why it causes drowsiness after even 1 or 2 drinks. Here's one of the issues with alcohol. As with many drugs that you take, depending on their half-life, alcohol is a CNS depressant, and it will cause you to get drowsy and sleep. We've probably all felt this when we've had a few drinks, for sure. But here's the issue. 4 hours later, it will disrupt your sleep because after it gets metabolized, your body starts waking up from the effects of it, and then it wears off, and then you're awake and you can't sleep very well. I can tell you I've had this happen many different times. That's why I just limit my alcohol. Janet, do you have any discussion about this?
Yeah, I do. I mean, alcohol and your benzos are very similar in that you get to sleep, but that sleep is not quality. And I think that's one of the important issues is that, yeah, you will get to sleep, but you will not get into the recovery phase and you will not get into the REM sleep. And if you do, it's very short lived. And so then you have a cycle that's starting that you have disrupted sleep. And on a chronic basis is a problem. So, I know that a glass of wine with your meal and things like that, people like to enjoy that. And I'm not saying to take that away, but if you're taking alcohol to get to sleep and stay asleep long term, it's very harmful for you.
And realize this, we're talking about sleep and recovery, right? Alcohol not only inhibits your sleep, it delays and inhibits recovery. Right. I mean, alcohol is a poison. We've talked about this on this podcast many different times. Alcohol is a poison. Your body deals with it as a poison. So what does that mean? When your body is busy dealing with alcohol as a poison and trying to get rid of the poison, it is not trying to help you recover and get stronger. It's just trying to deal with the poison. So realize that alcohol is a poison and hampers recovery. Caffeine, Janet?
So caffeine, of course, is a stimulant. So that's going to keep you up longer. And I think that everybody's response to caffeine is different than others. So I think that you just need to know your body and how you react to it. But clearly, if you're somebody that's affected by it, stop, limit the amount. I grew up on the farm where the coffee pot was always on 24/7. But, if you're somebody that it affects, limit it. And I'm sure that will help. And remember too, we're talking coffee, but there are so many supplements out there and drinks. Bang for one. I mean, there's so many things out there. Look at what you're ingesting. I know my kids have had different supplements and you read the back and it's almost like a shot of espresso. So don't think just don't think because you're taking a supplement that it's all safe. It could be that's one of the reasons that you're having trouble. So coffee's easy to control, limit yourself, but then also read your packages to make sure you're not adding something
pre-workout formulas. Pre-workout formulas, people that work out at 5 o'clock at night and they take a pre-workout formula. Realize pre-workout formulas usually have caffeine in them.
Right. But there's others that you wouldn't necessarily think that they're in sometimes. So just read your package.
That is true. Okay, supplements. You know, we talk a lot about supplements here, and we'll talk first about melatonin, because melatonin is a hormone, and of course, at Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy, we specialize in hormone replacement. So, Janet, tell us about melatonin.
So typically in the day when we start having less sunlight, it's actually the lack of sunlight that starts stimulating our body to release the hormone. Again, and this is not a sex hormone, it's a hormone that our body needs. It's called melatonin, and it helps to regulate our sleep. So it helps us to start calming down, start relaxing, and starting getting into sleep and help us get into REM sleep. And like our slide shows, it is inversely proportional to cortisol. So here we have a calming hormone, one that is telling our body to settle down and going to sleep. We prefer a sustained release product if somebody's having difficulty sleeping. The range is variable. It can be anywhere from 1 milligram on up to 20. If you go higher than that, I would do that with a physician or a nurse practitioner helping you with that. But it is the one that our body makes. And just a side note, parents of teenagers, this is the hormone that is off in our teenage kids. That's why they stay up later and they can't wake up as they easily could when they were younger, is that the melatonin doesn't get triggered until later in the evening, and then their cortisol is later in the morning. So they really do have a difference biologically happening in their body.
So realize you're trying to kick your teenager out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they say they just are unnecessarily tired. They're probably not kidding, because usually their melatonin is still high even at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So realize that. So I'm not saying we have to deal with that, because there is a schedule, but just give them a little bit of grace.
Right. And I think too, one of the things too, living in the Northwest, people in Alaska that have no sunlight for months and then sunlight all the time, this is where they start getting into trouble, is because they aren't having that normal rhythm of the sunlight and the sun going down. So, and there are other supplements that you can use. And again, I prefer not long-term sleep habits, no more than 14 days at a time. I feel safer with things like melatonin because that's what your body normally uses, but I don't like it to be the crutch either. There's valerian root. It helps with anxiety and calming, L-theanine, GABA, 5-HTP, and they're all very good short-term supplements to help with sleep.
GABA, remember we talked about that when we talked about how progesterone worked, and some of those, some of the benzodiazepines, some of the sleep medications. Well, you can actually take GABA specifically as a supplement. And it does not have the habit forming effects like the prescription medications do. 5-HTP is just one way of saying serotonin. And if you there's a lot of antidepressants like in the Prozac and Paxil, things like that, those work on serotonin. So those are supplements that you can actually take over the counter that doesn't have the side effects of some of the prescription medications. I think what's important is talk to your healthcare provider that knows about supplements. It's something that many healthcare providers don't know about. So talk to a healthcare provider that knows about supplements so you can help them with the dosing and a specific product. Realize that a lot of the products have multiple ingredients in them to help you sleep and help you stay asleep. So realize that there's some combination products, and work with a healthcare provider that's an expert. If you have any questions, of course, Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy, we can definitely help you.
And before we go further about supplements, they are what you pay for. And it's really important that you have a quality. So if it is dirt cheap, you're not getting the supplement that you're paying for.
You're getting the supplement you pay for. You just got to read the label appropriately.
I guess I missaid that.
Yeah.
So if you are looking for something that's going to work for you, you will have to have a decent quality product, and it's not going to be dirt cheap.
That's correct. All right, sleep environment. So we talk about this because this is, don't just talk about drug therapy or supplements here at the pharmacy. I mean, we're about solutions, and we want to make sure that people have optimal health, and that they're, we educate them to empower them to have optimal health. So sleep environment, the bedroom should be reserved for two things: intimacy and sleep. No TV in the bedroom. No phones in the bedroom. They should be off, maybe even in a drawer. I know some people, I'm not guilty. I don't do this. I should, but put them in a drawer in the nightstand. And then that way there's a lot less likely that it will disturb you. Janet.
So I have a side note too for parents. Don't put your kid in room for timeout. That was one of the things I've read. If you're in a habit of putting your child into timeout, that could mean, especially a young child, that is a bad place. So don't make it bad. Make it a good place. And, there's other rooms in the house for that. I know as my children got older, it was like, a lot easier. But when they're really young, don't make their room a bad place for them. There's other places for timeout. So, and I think that is easy as adults for, it's like, go to your room. But I think when they're really small, don't use it as a bad place. Make it a good place for them.
That's right. That also is a reminder too, for parents or anybody even. I know some kids have work environments like a desk or whatever to do their homework and stuff. Maybe that's not always the best place. And it's definitely not a good place to have a home office is in your bedroom, because then it'll be easier to get distracted when you go to sleep to do work, and you won't think of that environment as being a restful environment. Dark room, quiet room. We already talked about that. White noise. And actually, we are out of time. We have went over our hour. We've exhausted our entire hour. If anybody has any questions, 509-537-0411. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. Please leave comments if you have any questions, and we will definitely get back to you. Stay tuned for us for Thursday. We have an exciting guest on. Her name is Chris Fisk. She's with Chris's Skincare. She's going to talk about all things skincare. So stay tuned for that. That'll be Thursday, 8 to 9 a.m. And as always, you can catch us on podcast forums. So your favorite podcasts, Google, iTunes, iHeart, go to your favorite podcast forums and like and share. Don't forget about our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is ever growing. So please, we made it to our magic 100 subscribers, and YouTube starts giving us more hits when we do that. So every time we get more subscribers, we get more hits. So please go to our YouTube channel, like it, subscribe to it, and comment, and let us know what you'd like to hear next. So thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. We will see and hear you Thursday. Thank you so much.